So you're welcome to today's session. Hopefully you can all see my screen. If not, then please just put a comment in the chat. So yeah, today's session is all around Microsoft Secure Score and more broadly around cybersecurity hygiene. So before we jump into the full session, I'll just do a quick intro on myself and we'll then get started. So my name's Luke Elston. I'm a principal consultant at CyberOne. Prior to being at CyberOne, I was in Microsoft for 8 years. So I was in various technical roles within Microsoft's various practices, and have brought that experience over to CyberOne. And generally anything Microsoft I will get involved in. So hence why it's myself you've got today. You can see a few familiar faces in the call as well. So great to see you guys, and some new ones as well. So hopefully we can enlighten you around Secure Score today. So with that said, we'll make a proper start. So I do just want to quickly intro our business. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time here. So a few things to call out is that CyberOne have been, a security business for 18, going on 19 years at this point, pretty much. We've got an awful lot of experience in that time and have been providing managed security services for that full duration, really. So we've got plenty of experience. You can see some of our clients over on the right-hand side and a couple of accreditations down at the bottom, a few that we're quite proud of. We've got Crest SOC, which is quite a rare accreditation. There's not many providers in the UK with that one. And we've also got an incident response accreditation through the NCSC, which again is fairly rare. So we've got some really great credentials. So yeah, that's just a brief intro over ourselves. And with that done, we will progress into the main content. So as a kind of an introduction, what I wanted to focus on first is cyber hygiene. So we'll use this to build up our understanding of why good security practice is important, and then we'll pivot over to Secure Score and tie it all together. So as with all of these kind of sessions that we run, if there is any comments or questions, please leave them in the chat and we'll get back to them. There will be time for a Q&A at the end, so we'll make sure that any questions get answered in that time. So in terms of cyber hygiene, really you can think of it as routine good behaviors. So the type of things that your organization should be doing to make sure that cybersecurity is part of your agenda, it's being proactively managed and considered, and that that's consistent. That's really what we kind of think of when we think about hygiene. So some examples on screen. It could be to do with keeping your devices updated, the right patches in place, the operating system, with the latest version. It could be that you're protecting your identities and you're managing them in a consistent way. Your JML process is smooth, and that then ties into good kind of security around provisioning and deprovisioning of users. Naturally, we've also got data being a huge one, probably the most challenging one for most organizations, but good data controls around DLP or data encryption, very, very important. Some of the ones just to quickly call out around incident response. So, what we're seeing, as a service provider in the industry and in the industry at large really is that incident response and having a defined process and the right skills in-house or outsourced to perform an incident response process are really key. Cybersecurity has been a hot topic for a number of years now, and it doesn't seem to be cooling down. So investing in the more advanced capabilities such as incident response can pay dividends if the worst were to happen. So, cybersecurity, sometimes we can be a little bit pessimistic, and for this slide, I'm unfortunately not going to change that narrative. So I'm going to give us some quite worrying statistics. So these are from the UK. These are the UK-based stats that have come from a Microsoft report, actually. What I will say as well, the session is obviously being recorded and the material will be shared afterwards, so you'll get access to anything that we've referenced in the presentation as well. So we'll start off with the good news on this page, which is that around 13% of businesses in the UK are resilient. So that's great for those businesses. Generally, what we see for them is that they've chosen to prioritize cybersecurity. They're well prepared in the event of an attack, and they're also well informed. So they're up to date with the latest technology, They understand what the latest threats may be and how to defend themselves against it. Great for those 13%, but really we'd want to see that number higher. The UK it's a big economy, an important player in the global economy. We've got lots of great businesses in our country, particularly in the financial sector, right, as we're probably all aware. So resiliency in those areas is absolutely critical. And 13%, we really want to see that higher. And that's part of our mission statement at CyberOne, is to really empower UK and businesses globally. Moving on to then the vulnerable section, the middle. So the largest chunk, which is probably as you would expect. So we've got around 48% of organisations in the UK of what we would consider vulnerable. And this is where we may see a lack of leadership, lack of support from leadership, or maybe just lack of security leadership in general. We might see that cybersecurity is not highly prioritised, or maybe not even prioritised at all. It could be that it's under-resourced, so there may be no real security focused individuals in the team. It could also be that there may be a couple of people, but people are wearing multiple hats, and security is one of those hats, which in and of itself is not ideal. We know really that you need dedicated resource in the security space to have a good chance against the bad guys, and that's just the unfortunate reality. What we may also see is that security is reactive and not proactive. So you need both. You need to be proactive in your security in the sense of making sure you're configuring things, you're using your technology to its fullest upfront, and that you're also continually monitoring how you're managing that. And this is something that SecureScore, as we'll come on to later, can help with. But you also need good reactive security as well. But it's not an either or, it's both. You need both of those things. And then finally, a really worrying percentage there in high risk, so 39%. These are businesses where the leadership is uninformed completely. They don't have visibility or a real understanding of the modern security landscape, and they're just lacking knowledge. And if leadership is lacking in those areas, what we often find is that the downstream teams can also suffer. So that can be quite a concern. What we generally see in these high-risk businesses as well is that they'd have no threat monitoring at all, which is, of course, a proactive element of security. So they would have no real capability to understand in real time, is there a threat to the business? And you can immediately imagine why that's a bad thing. They may also lack security assessments, so there's no consideration of actually looking at the vulnerabilities that may be in the business. So there's no vulnerability assessment taking place, there's no penetration test taking place. So how can a business like that understand where its weaknesses are? Well, the reality is it probably can't. And then finally, there could be technical debt. Generally, what we mean by technical debt is it could be legacy technology, it could be technology that's no longer fit for purpose or even completely out of support. And these things can cause security problems from multiple angles. If something's out of support, it means it's not receiving security patches, which means there could be an existing vulnerability in that software that has been unchecked for potentially years, and that business could be continually exposed. And that would be one, pretty dangerous example. So like I said, we're starting a bit pessimistically here, but we will, I promise, get a bit more positive as we move on. But before we do that, we're gonna stay on the pessimistic line of thinking. So what we've seen in 2003 is that the average cost of a data breach globally was around £3.2 million. So really quite worrying, and that's gone up enough every year. The trend seems to just keep increasing. There's lots of reasons for that. A big one is increasing regulation. So we're probably all aware that the UK and Europe in general is a highly regulated environment. We've got new regulations such as DORA coming into place, for example, and they apply additional layers, and we get this layered effect of many regulations. And if we breach some of those, we can, be fined quite large sums of money. We've obviously got GDPR, which has been around for some time now, as one of the contributors there as well. So just some further stats in purple. And I like to raise these three areas when I have conversations around security, because really on the identity, email, and device front, those are really three of the core pillars of good security. If you can protect your identities, then you can potentially offset the risk of, credential-based attacks, which is still very prevalent. It could be if you protect your email part of your organization correctly that you mitigate phishing, and phishing has been and will probably always be one of the ways that attackers gain initial access. That there's statistics out there that they're not on this slide, but there's other information out there, which is really that if you think of it in plain language, if you've got a business of 100 employees, all you really need is one of those employees to click on a phishing email and interact with it. Well, here we've got around 8% of people do that in 2003. So that would be 8 employees in that example. And, you can very quickly scale that up. If you're a larger business, it gets quite worrying. You've got dozens and dozens of employees who may interact with a phishing email. And that sort of guarantees an attacker will at least get an initial sort of toe or foot into your organization, which, we want to avoid. On the device front, so ransomware is still very popular. It got its first kind of claim to fame a good few years ago now, but it's still very prevalent. So what we will see in the industry is that ransomware typically, if a device is unmanaged and therefore relatively unsecure, that's a great place for an attacker to launch a ransomware campaign, because they're almost guaranteed to infect that initial device, and from there they can laterally traverse and spread themselves around your network. And of course, ransomware is typically self-propagating as well. So just some of the stats. So we've got average breakout time. So the average breakout time, this is the time from when the attacker initially gains access to one of your devices or one of your systems to when they elevate their attack to something more significant. So in traditional language, this could be they compromise a Active Directory user and then they pivot to full domain admin compromise. In the cloud world, this could be they compromise a cloud-based user, and from there they pivot to compromise a global admin. Same kind of equivalence, really. And what we see is, around 84 minutes, let's say an hour and a half to be generous. So there's a very small window of time where if an attacker, a very determined attacker, launches an attack, they're successful gaining access, we've got about an hour and a half to stop them spreading further. And that time is crucial. And this is where proactive security comes in, the ability to detect in real time dangers in your environment. So this is where the value of something like a SOC is critical, because without that continuous detection ability, you're pretty much out of luck with this kind of thing. Beyond that, we've got median dwell time. So the dwell time is essentially the period from that initial attack, that uplift, that privilege escalation the attackers performed up until the point that they launched the main part of their attack. So what we see is that's often data exfiltration. So some attackers may actually, although the average is around 16 days, some attackers could wait months for the right opportunity. They could gain a foothold in your environment, stay quiet, stay undetected, and then when they're ready, they could launch a large campaign in a quick space of time. But typically what we see is around 16 days for that period. And then finally, I just want to cover the orange one there. So in terms of the number of security tools used, we've got interesting stats there around small, mid-market and enterprise. So even small businesses, which a few hundred employees would generally be considered a small business, we've got 15 to 20 different security tools. If you think of that from just a management perspective, it's complicated, right? It's complicated to administrate. If you think of it from a financial perspective, it's expensive because you're paying for multiple vendors. These different tools may not integrate well with each other. And there could even be incompatibility or unnecessary complication by having multiple tools. And this is one of the driving forces behind a lot of businesses becoming more and more interested in Microsoft. And I'm sure there's plenty of you on the call who understand the value of going with a best of suite provider like Microsoft. So with that said, I'm talking through these things to set the theme and hopefully build up our kind of view, and then we'll be able to really understand the benefits of Secure Score. So just briefly, take a more positive spin now. So how can we actually protect against some of the things that I've spoken about? So going back to our concept of good cyber hygiene, what we can actually do is apply, a relatively small amount of controls, and I say relatively a bit tentatively there, but a relatively small amount of controls to secure the bulk of our environment. So we've got some examples on the screen, MFA being an obvious one. An interesting point actually is that if you are a Microsoft Entra environment, Microsoft have actually recently enforced MFA. So you won't have a choice. Now, that feature may not be rolled out into your tenant just yet, but it is coming. It's been rolled out over the last month or so across every single Microsoft tenant globally. So sooner rather than later, you are going to be required to enable MFA for every single user. So just a heads up on that one. If you weren't aware, that is coming imminently, and you won't have a choice, which ultimately is good from a security perspective, but you just need to be prepared. Beyond that, we've got things like zero trust. So zero trust really, it comes back to the old saying that we had some years ago, which is that we should assume breach or assume compromise. And again, it's taking a view that we can't really trust the assets in our business. So even if we secure our users, the users themselves are always vulnerable. Even if we secure our devices, we can't guarantee for certain that they'll be secure indefinitely. Okay, there's still going to be some inherent vulnerability. So the concept behind zero trust is we don't trust these things. We assume the worst, and therefore we're prepared in the event of an incident to kind of react in the correct ways. Just sticking with the device theme, we've also got making sure that you have a good EDR or XDR technology in place. So EDR would be endpoint detection and response. That's an endpoint security tool. XDR is a much broader tool. XDR really is a platform level tool. So for those of us, again, who are using Microsoft technologies, this is the Defender XDR platform. So within there, you've got tools for device security, email security, identity security, and various other things. That's an XDR platform. It all joins together nicely. It's well integrated out of the box, and it covers a really broad range of security areas. So an XDR tool, really it's pretty much mandatory nowadays. I would say you can't really get away without that joined up security defense. Beyond that, making sure software is up to date and making sure patches are applied in a good cadence is also really important. And then finally, just quickly on data, good DLP controls, good data encryption practices, good data classification, all really critical. A bit beyond the scope of today's session, but all of these items are really key. So just finally, I mean, these are things that I've touched on really, so I'm not going to go through the bullet points, but I'm sure you all understand why cyber hygiene is important. It's about doing the kind of basics really well, consistently, and not allowing for any gaps in our sort of fundamentals of our defense. Now, just one other thing that I wanted to mention is that it is Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October, so you've got about a week or so left. So what I would say is that take advantage of that. If you need to go and speak to leaders in your business or help spread the word around cyber awareness, now is really the best time to do it. You've got a good excuse. You can use today's session to hopefully evidence why cyber is important. So just wanted to raise that. Okay, so we've set the scene, and next we'll move on to the meat of today's session. So we're going to talk about Microsoft Secure Score. So just to kind of define what Secure Score is, I've put a quote here from Microsoft, and I think they've summarized it pretty well, to be honest. So what they say is that Microsoft Secure Score is a measurement of an organization's security posture. So nice and simple. I would agree with their definition as well. Secure Score is a simple numeric way to provide, a very simple view or something that's actually quite complex and simplify it into a single number that gives you, at a quick glance, an indication of how secure or maybe not so secure your Microsoft environment is. So it's all around security posture. It's around understanding vulnerabilities, where the gaps may be, what the recommended remediation steps are. And Secure Score provides all of this information to us pretty much on a plate. So as I said, we get a view of your current state. So what is your organization like today? What is your current secure score? How many vulnerabilities does Microsoft believe that you have? You then get real-time visibility of this information. So secure score is a dynamic number. It changes every day. It actually may even change multiple times a day. I believe it refreshes every few hours. I want to say every 8 hours or so, secure score will refresh within your tenant. So you could, in theory, have a changing number, within the working day. You get a real-time view, which is great. You can check it every day if you want, and you'll have an accurate understanding of the trend that your organization is following. Are we getting more secure? Or are we actually getting less secure? And you can, at a very quick glance, have an insight into that. If you use Secure Score well, it gives you the ability to proactively assess your security posture and then to proactively remediate any gaps that may exist. So that's really the core element is Secure Score highlights these things to us, but the action is still on us. We need to take proactive, take things into our own hands, be proactive and actually remediate the recommendations within Secure Score within our own time. And then finally, you do get the ability to benchmark yourself against an organization of a similar size. So Secure Score looks at businesses with a similar kind of user count, and it will give you a score against them. So if you're competitive, you can try and beat organizations that are similar to yourselves. And then finally, there is, Secure Score enables more than just the items that I've talked about, but also there's a cost saving element. And this is, something that I like to talk about is that in cybersecurity, if we're proactive and we manage our estate, to a good standard, that's actually what I would call an investment. It's not necessarily a cost to us. Cybersecurity should be viewed as an investment. It's a long-term investment to protect your business, to protect against potentially inevitable attacks from adversaries. And if you can invest in these things upfront as early as possible, do security in the right way, you can potentially offset some very big damage to your business. So what I thought would be interesting, I'm sure a few of you are wondering, well, how do I see my secure score? So on the left-hand side, I've just put some steps on the screen. So if you want to sort of play along with the rest of today's session, if you go to your browser and just type in security.microsoft.com, that'll take you over to the Defender portal. And then on the left-hand navigation, if you look underneath the exposure management section, you'll see Secure Score. And if you just click on that icon, you'll then get a view of your Secure Score dashboard. Now, you will require a level of admin access to be able to view this. I've put some of the roles on the right-hand side. So if you yourself don't have admin access, maybe you can reach out to someone in your business who does, and you can follow along that way. What I will say as well, there are additional ways to gain access to Secure Score other than what I've put on the screen, but that's a bit more nuanced, and I don't want to overcomplicate the session. But there's no requirement to follow along. But on the next slide, I'm going to show you what is considered a good secure score. So take a look at your organization score now and keep that private to yourself. And I'll bring up the way that we look at scoring organizations. Okay, so our first category, if you like, is under 70%. So scoring less than 70% generally indicates that you need to have a larger focus on secure score in your business. Typically, you're going to see a very long list of remedial activities. You could have potentially hundreds of recommendations from Secure Score with a score under 70. Now, when we engage with a lot of our customers, what we often find is that we see organizations, we've seen organizations as low as single digits, so less than 10%. Now, that is quite rare. Generally, we see organizations around 30, 40, 50% Secure Score. This really is just not good enough, is the reality. If I was being totally candid, we need to be looking at getting ourselves above 70%. The way to think about it is, if we're scoring around 50, it's great to say, okay, we've remediated about half of all the recommendations. But of course, if you flip that on its head, we've still got half of them to go. And what you'll often find is that the initial uplift you can gain in Secure Score can be quite easy. The controls and remediation that you can apply is generally, some of those earlier points can be done in a few clicks of a button. But as you mature your organization and your secure score improves, then you can end up in a position where the remaining items are actually quite complicated. So yeah, you can say, oh yeah, we're around 50, maybe 60. It's not too bad. But if those remaining 40% are difficult, actually you've potentially got a long way to go. So this is just something to keep in mind. So beyond that, what I would say is that around 75% is good. You know, you're 3/4 of the way there. You've probably put in some effort into getting to this percentage. It's unlikely that it's happened by accident, is what I will say. You will have had to done some level of proactive configuration of your Microsoft environment, which is great. But what we'll often still see is that even with around a 75% secure score, there could still be dozens of recommendations to be completed. And again, some of those will be quite complicated and may need an entire project just to remediate. If we then move on, you can kind of see a trend here in the numbers. So what I would say is around 85% is great. You're doing really good. You've absolutely put in effort to achieve that percentage. You've dealt with all of the low-hanging fruit. All of the quick wins will have been remediated. You've done the basics really well. The principles that we covered on the previous slide a couple of slides ago around MFA, around zero trust, around XDR, data security, you've probably made good efforts in all of these areas, and you're seeing a great secure score as a result. So if you're in this kind of area, well done. You know, you are legitimately in a good position. But we can always go a step further, in which case around 90% secure score would be where we'd be aiming. Now, if you can get 90% or higher, you've absolutely dedicated some time to this. You've aligned some resources, you've given them some dedicated time to focus on this proactive side of security. So congratulations if you're in this area. Most organizations aren't, is the idea. So this should give you a view as to, you can try and think about where your organization is in relation to these kind of thresholds, and just consider what you might need to do to move up to the next bracket. Okay, so here's a screenshot of Secure Score. What I will say is that I'm not going to be demoing Secure Score live because, of course, it has sensitive data in it. I can't demo one of our customer environments for obvious reasons. And I also can't demo our environment as well because it would expose users and devices and IPs and things like that. So what I've done is grabbed screenshots of the right, relevant pages just to give you a view into Secure Score if you're not familiar with it already. So secure score is all around really identifying what good looks like, understanding, okay, here's our current state. In this example, we're around 82%, which is a great secure score, but there's always work to do. You can actually see in the actions to review section, there's 53 actions there to address. That's still a lot of individual bits of configuration needed. So you can be around 80%, you can be in a great place, but there could still be some significant work ahead to improve things even further. So with that said, let's start to dive into some of the other components of Secure Score. So a really helpful part of the dashboard that you have is around metrics and trends. Now what this looks like will differ for all of us. You can see the example that I've got on screen. This organization around 81%, let's say. So again, in a fairly good position. And the reason I highlighted this example is you can see actually the blue line on the comparison trend is very stable, but there is a slight decrease. So things are just over time decreasing. You can see that the score there, we're losing around 7% over a sort of a monthly period. So if that was to continue, by the end of the year, we'd have a poor secure score. We'd go from having around 80 to potentially around 70 or maybe even lower. And that's, like I said earlier, secure score is dynamic. As Microsoft's product changes, as they add in new features or features are updated, secure score moves with them. As additional vulnerabilities are discovered and new techniques are learned by the industry, the controls that you have change, and therefore secure score changes as well. You may also, and other examples could be, maybe you've hired 5 new members of staff, you've deployed 5 new devices, and you've set them up with new email addresses. Well, those additional 5 people, unless you're securing them to the same standard as your other employees, they could actually represent a new threat. So this is where consistent security comes in, making sure that the policies that are applied to your current user base are also applied to any future hires that you bring in. And that's a gap that we often see is people forget to make sure that new employees are locked down in the same way. That could be a reason for a kind of decrease. So although this organization is quite stable, the trend is not good. So what we'd look to do is identify why that trend is happening. Now in the bottom left, you can see there's actually something called regression. And you can see where the red bars are, there's actually been particular points in time where something has regressed. So where we've got quite a large bar there in the very bottom left, I would say that that indicates something fundamental has changed in Secure Score. So maybe there's a new control that's been added and this organization hasn't configured anything in that control. Of course, that's going to negatively affect the score. So this is why continually monitoring Secure Score is important. You can't just set and forget it. You need to be actively considering it and keeping on top of it over, a long period of time. Now, there's also something on the bottom right around risk acceptance. So within Secure Score, it is possible to mark a particular recommendation or a particular finding as an accepted risk. If you do this, it will remove that. It will basically assume that you're not going to remediate that problem. Now that will still leave a bad impact on your Secure Score. So just because you mark the risk as accepted, Microsoft don't then say, okay, well, great, we'll give you 82% because you're accepting the risk, right? You're agreeing that there is a gap in your security. It's just that you've agreed to leave that gap there, but it will still negatively affect your Secure Score. So what I would say is there may be some reasons why you would accept a particular risk, but generally we'd want to avoid that because the more risks that you accept, the more gaps you're leaving open, and they're not going to automatically get fixed. So just keep that in mind. What I would say as well, it's not shown on screen here, but you can actually define thresholds. So within your Secure Score, you can add what's called a score zone. Sorry. And the score zone allows you to basically set a minimum threshold and a maximum threshold. The idea is that the minimum you don't want to go below because you're going to essentially fall below something that you as an organization believe is acceptable. And then the goal, the high end score, is where you're aiming for. So that's a good way to kind of give yourself some barriers, make sure you don't drop below a certain number, but also try and proactively aim to increase it towards a higher number. So that's also a technique that can be quite helpful. So if you were to actually start to want to remediate a particular item within Secure Score, when you're doing so, you can actually define what your status and action plan are. So on the right-hand side, you can see an example. What I want to quickly highlight is that there's actually a number of different statuses that a Secure Score finding can actually have. So of course it can be completed. Now the action will only ever be marked as completed if you meet the mitigation exactly as Microsoft have described. So you can't manually mark something as complete. It will only do that automatically as part of the system. You can mark items as to address or planned, which is indicating that you're aware of the recommendation. You may be aligning a particular resource and giving them a start date to start working on the remediation. You can then mark something as accepted risk, which I mentioned previously. And you can also mark things as resolved through a third party or resolved through an alternate mitigation. So these options just give you a bit of flexibility. For organizations who have technology other than Microsoft, maybe you have an EDR tool that's different from Defender for Endpoint. Well, that's still good. You still have an EDR tool. So you could maybe mark some of the items as resolved through a third party, for example. Now what you want to make sure is that you're not just arbitrarily marking things off, because if you choose to resolve something with a third party, that will actually give you the uplift in percentage points. So you'll gain those points. So basically what I'm saying is don't lie to yourself. Don't pretend that you've resolved a particular recommendation if really you haven't, because you're going to give yourself a false sense of security, really. In terms of some ways you should go about actually uplifting your secure score, is you might want to consider identifying some quick wins. Things that could be done maybe in a day or two's time. It's not going to be too complicated. If we can do those things quickly, you can gain a good uplift in secure score over a short period. So quick wins, everybody loves a quick win, right? It's also a great way to show value to leadership as well. I'd also recommend making sure you have owners assigned for each of the findings in secure score. So giving someone a level of accountability and ownership over an item is generally a good way to encourage them to remediate something. So just consider that approach as well. So those would be some general ways. Now, what I would say is that you will find some recommendations in secure score that are quite complicated, in which case you might need a sort of a mini project to actually understand the requirement, do any necessary prep work, and then actually complete the remedial work. So in some instances, you may need to take a slightly more strategic view and think of can we justify the cost behind this particular control? It may be that it will take you several weeks or even months to complete a single individual control. So there's always a cost benefit analysis that will have to happen there. Okay, so I just want to take us through some specific examples now. Just before I do that, what I want to say is that you should think of secure score as a BAU task, right? Business as usual. It should be part of your regular routine operations. So whether this is every week, every 2 weeks, once a month, maybe, you should be monitoring secure score because, as I said, it's dynamic. It will change day to day. What you don't want to do is do some initial uplift of secure score today, wait 6 months and then come back to it, because what you're going to see is a decrease. Your secure score will have dropped potentially quite significantly, and all of that hard work you've done has essentially been undone, which is the unfortunate reality. So keeping on top of it is absolutely critical. So just to talk through what we're seeing on screen here, just in the yellow box, you can see that actually this particular recommendation is partially completed. So this is important to understand. In this particular case, this is a device level control. So turn on real-time protection. That's part of Defender for Endpoint. This is a particular setting. You could deploy the setting via Intune. So technically speaking, it's relatively easy. In this particular case, there's no real downside to enabling this. But for this particular organization, they've only scored a 1.09 out of 10. What that indicates to me is that there's a number of devices within their business that do not have this applied, but strangely, there's a small number that do. So that's inconsistent, right? That business has tried to enable this setting for some of their devices, but not for others. So that potentially could be a quick win, right? Because they've already proved they can enable the setting. They just need to make sure they apply that control everywhere. What you'll also notice is that Secure Score marks this as a regressed item. Now, that also indicates to me that previously, historically, this business actually was doing better. So for this particular recommendation, maybe it was a 10 out of 10. Maybe they had every device in the business with this second setting in place. But maybe that was a year ago. And since that time, they've employed lots of new people, they've onboarded new devices, and those devices are not receiving the same settings, and therefore they've regressed. Secure Score has identified they were doing fairly well, and they've lost some of that progress. So the next example I've just highlighted in purple there. So this is around a local security authority. Again, this is part of the Windows operating system. It's part of Defender for Endpoint. So I'm going to move over to the next slide to talk through this one in more detail. So what I've done here is click into the recommendation. So this is the view that you would get if you opened up the recommendation page. So we can see it's the same one, enable local security authority protection. And we get a bit of a basic description of what this is. The LSA, sometimes called LSAS, is really critical. It's part of the Windows operating system. that protects passwords. So very, very important that that's secured. Therefore, it's a high priority item. Now, if we were to click on the exposed entities page, we'd get a list of devices. So in this case, there's actually only 5. They're Windows servers. And we can see that as recent as the 22nd of October, a couple of days ago, these were the current unsecured devices in this particular environment. We can see Secure Score considers them with high criticality. So to me, there's only 5 servers here. The LSA process, again, this happens to be a relatively easy fix. This is something, as I said, you could deploy via Intune. It's a single individual setting. There's no real downside to enabling this. So potentially it's a quick win, but it still is a highly critical item. Now, what we can also learn from Secure Score is if we take a look at the integration with Defender for Endpoint vulnerability management. So you can see where I've highlighted in red. If we were to click on that link there, it would take us to the page on the right-hand side. And now we get actually more information. And this is where we come back to Microsoft's kind of best of suite approach and how they integrate all their technologies together. Because what we can see is that we get more detail, right? We can see actually there is 2 critical devices that are exposed, but we know from Secure Score that there's 5 in total that are sort of in scope of this particular item. Now, from here, what else can we learn? Well, we can take a look at the remediation options, and both Secure Score and Defender Vulnerability Management will present us with usually a step-by-step guide on what we need to do. In this case, it's a bit more basic, and they've just provided us with a registry key. Now, that registry key will apply this setting. So all we need to do is enforce that registry key somehow. You could use group policy, but that's a bit old school. I definitely recommend Intune in this case. So that's just one example, right? And the reason I wanted to just raise the integration between Secure Score and Defender Vulnerability Management is that some of you will have that the license that includes Defender Vulnerability Management. So you actually get really great integration across all the Microsoft tools, and you actually get a bit more detailed view other than just Secure Score on its own. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly touch on data privacy. And this is something that comes up from time to time. And what I'm going to mention now is actually true pretty much for all of Microsoft security tools. So the way that Secure Score works is it will store your data in the same geolocation as your entire Microsoft tenant. There are data centers within the UK scattered around Europe in various countries and also in the United States. So again, it depends where your tenant was originally set up. Only you will know that, and if you need guidance on how to find that, we can help. Your data will be pseudo-anonymized and stored in Microsoft's primary data center in the United States. So as part of the terms of service for using Microsoft security tools, you agree that some of your data will be pseudo-anonymized and will be ported over to Microsoft data centers. Now, some of you may not like that, but this is what gives Microsoft such a great breadth and depth of threat intelligence. They have more threat intelligence at their fingertips than any other security vendor. And this is part of the reason is that if we use any of their services, we're providing some anonymized telemetry. That benefits us because it makes things like Secure Score more accurate. It makes products like Sentinel and Defender for Endpoint and all the other security tools more powerful. So really, it's a good thing, but I just want you to be aware that that happens. Now, the data that you see within your tenant is retained for 90 days. So, from this point, so the reason that's important to understand is that if you've remediated actions in Secure Score, let's say 180 days ago, well, the historic data for those will have been removed. So you won't see that action within Secure Score anymore. You only get a snapshot of the last 90-day period. So just keep that in mind as it may skew. You may be wondering, oh, we did all this work, where's that information gone? It's possibly because it's fallen outside of that 90-day window. And then finally, so you can't change where the data is secured. Wherever your tenant is located is where the Secure Score data will go. There's no control around that at all. And again, all of these things are true for the majority of Microsoft security tools. So it's just good to understand sometimes how the data side of it works. So we're sort of getting towards the end here, and I just wanted to raise a point around empowering leadership. So some of you may be in leadership positions on today's webinar, some of you may not be, but Secure Score presents us with really easy to understand numeric values that you don't need to be technical to understand the number. You can see the screenshot in the upper right-hand corner. This organization had a Secure Score of around 71%. We can see the trend over time is going up, right? They're improving as the weeks go by. So that's a really good indicator to senior leadership that actually the work you're putting in is paying off. It's very clear. You can't fake this. Microsoft decide how their algorithm works. They decide how the scoring works. So, this is great. It's hard evidence that the efforts the investment in security is paying off. You can also see on the history page, which I've not highlighted today, but there is a history page as well, that over the last 30 days, there's a 10-point increase. So again, that's another way to evidence actually over the long term, we can see the trend is really good, but in the recent 30 days, yeah, we can see that we're still improving. Again, a really great sign. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, again, we actually get a high-level view of all of the categories of statuses within Secure Score. So in this example, we can see there's around 32 regressed items. That's not great. We can see there's 56 that are still outstanding, and there's only 3 that are planned. Okay, so this example that we're seeing is not great because what this indicates to me is that there is no current focus on Secure Score. What we'd like to present to leadership is sort of the opposite of that third screenshot. We'd want to see that there's no regression or very limited regression, and that actually all of the items within Secure Score are planned and that we're working through them. So that would be what we'd want to be showing to leadership. Now, in terms of the way you can articulate some of this, you can highlight, well, okay, over the past period of time, over the past month or quarter, we've remediated 20 items, 50 items, and that's improved our secure score by a certain percentage. And again, it's very easy to evidence that. You can just take a screenshot. There's no complicated dashboard required. What you could also say is that, well, our organization, we're around 75% secure score, but organizations of a similar size are only 45%. So if you can evidence that actually you're outperforming your peers, again, that's a great message to security leadership. Now, what you could also do is maybe going back to that pessimistic mindset is take a negative approach and say, well, currently we don't have the resources to uplift our secure score. And because of that, we've seen a number of recommendations that actually indicate that we're vulnerable to phishing or we're vulnerable to data compromise. And this could be another way to encourage leadership to invest in security. If you can identify where the gaps are, present those through a couple of screenshots from Secure Score, you've got something very easy to prove there. So again, that's another technique you could use to engage leadership. So with all that said, what I would say is that despite the information I've given you, there are still some challenges that you may come across in Secure Score. So things like lack of awareness, hopefully we're all aware of what Secure Score can do now. Lack of proactivity, as I said at the start of the call, some organizations just don't focus enough time on Secure Score. It needs to be a BAU task. You need to be continually checking in. What is our Secure Score this week compared to last week? Have we improved? Are we regressing? Has any of the controls changed? These are the kind of things you need to be on top of. Some organizations will actually encounter technical blockers. And this might be because the complexity of the particular recommendation is actually quite high. And some of the items that need to be remediated, as I said, they can be entire projects in and of themselves, which of course can be time consuming. You may also find that you've got limited technical resources or limited skills in-house, which can also be a bit of a barrier. If you don't understand some of the deep technical elements within Secure Score, that may limit you in terms of how much remediation you can perform. And there's some other examples of there, typical stuff like people wearing multiple hats, where security is not their main role, where the technology itself is always moving. We know that cybersecurity is always continually evolving, and keeping track with that can be a challenge. It also could be that you've actually made some good efforts in Secure Score, but that some of your items do not align to Microsoft's recommendation exactly. So this is where we might see a partial recommendation where you're not quite aligned to best practice. So you're almost there, but there's a few more steps that you need. So these are some examples that we see, and we've had lots of customers over the years come to us with these kinds of challenges. So with that said, what I quickly just wanted to do is introduce a managed service that CyberOne provide. We call it our Secure Score Rapid Remediation Service. And the whole concept is to, as you can probably guess from the title, is to manage your secure score for you. So part of the value that we look to add here is we look to engage with your organization, onboard some of our technical team, our engineers, to actually go ahead and remediate the items in Secure Score on your behalf. So if you've got limited technical teams in your business, if you're wearing many hats, you don't have the capacity or resources, then you could bring someone like ourselves in and we can take that burden off your hands. So part of what we guarantee with our service here is that we will achieve up to 90% secure score. So we're going to get you as high as possible. Now that is always different for every organization. Some businesses, it may take months, others it may take weeks. And we'll obviously have a dialogue around, kind of the timelines that we're working towards. But the idea is that wherever you currently are, whether you're 20% secure score or 80% secure score, we'll get you up to that 90% threshold. Will make sure that you're secured to a really high standard. Now, what we also do, because as we understand from today's session, secure score is not set and forget. You can't just walk away from it. You have to maintain it. The technology changes, the cyber threats out there change. So part of also what we offer here is an ongoing service. So yeah, great, we'll get you up to 90%, but perhaps more importantly, we'll maintain that for you. So as Microsoft updates its products, new controls come in, as you bring in new users or devices or other things in your organization change, we will maintain hands-on with your environment and ensure that your secure score is at that target percentage, around that 90% percentage. The idea being that you can forget about it. So you offload all of the thinking and working and sort of doing of secure score to ourselves, and we provide a fully managed service around that piece. So just in terms of scope, I mean, I've really just outlined it, but in very simple terms, we remediate anything that's outstanding. We'll have a dialogue with you to make sure that there's no impact on your business as we fix some of the items in here. If some of the items in secure score are particularly complicated, or perhaps there's a limitation or some extra complexity that means we can't quite do it in your organization, we'll raise that with you and we'll have that conversation. If you've got a target percentage in mind, we will aim for that. It could be that you've got 90% would be great, but for now let's go for 80. If that's the goal, we can work with you to do that. And like I said, at 90 is kind of where we aim for. And what we always guarantee is that we'll overachieve comparative organizations. So organizations of a similar size, whatever score they're achieving, we'll make sure that we beat it, because an important part of security is making sure that you're not last in the race. You need to be ahead of the curve. So we'll make sure that you are within your kind of organization size, one of the leaders in security in those places. So just finally, just very high level, in terms of how we deliver the service. So phase one is we do that uplift. We get hands-on with your environment. We rapidly remediate the threat, the vulnerabilities identified in secure score, and we get your percentage up to that agreed value, like I said, typically around 90% for most businesses. And then phase two, we maintain it, nice and simple. We agree a certain threshold to maintain your organization within, and we'll stick at that point. Okay, so with that said, open to questions. I know we've had a couple in the chat as I've been talking. But thank you all for listening. If there is any questions now, please drop them in and we'll look at some of those shortly. So I'm just going to look through the chat here. Just give me one moment. Okay, so there's a question around how secure score is calculated. So yeah, so secure score, I mean, really the proprietary algorithm, we don't know. Microsoft doesn't publish the exact mechanism they use to generate the actual score. But what we do know is that for each recommendation that appears, there is an individual score for each recommendation. So within the actual secure score dashboard, some of the examples that we talked about before around the LSA process, that has an individual percentage assigned to it. So we know that if we remediate that item, it will add that percentage to secure score. So for example, if there's a recommendation that's worth 1% and we remediate that recommendation, we gain 1% on our secure score. So that's kind of how the calculation works. But like I said, we don't know the exact details of the mechanism. So yeah, we've got a raised hand there. So if you've got a question, please drop that in the chat, and I will get back to you. We've also got another question just around quick wins shown in secure score. So yeah, so secure score itself doesn't actually show the quick wins. It's something that you will have to interpret on your own. So that's where kind of technical expertise is important to understand what are the implications of a particular recommendation in secure score. So this is where we would need to, make sure that you're understanding what is being presented, and that's something that our team can help with. So unfortunately, secure score doesn't expressly tell us that.
I can actually unmute Everard if you would like.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, if we have a question over voice, yeah, let's do that.
Everard, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, we've got you.
Thanks a lot. I think that with the voice it will be easy because the question is a bit tricky. Microsoft makes very easy for us to visualize the score, but in my opinion, make a nightmare for us to be able to actually approach the problem and solve, because they duplicate, sometimes they triplicate the same configurations among different policies. So if you go towards to the security baseline, you have some settings there. If you decide to take a device configuration, you have some settings there. If you decide to have more granularity and use like setting catalogs, you have the same configurations there. And plus, they have different names among those different places. So my question will be, what is the way that you go, majority, like when you approach this problem? Do you have everything using set catalogs? Do you divide this between policies and catalogs? How you do it, and what is your recommendation regarding that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So just for the benefit of everybody, so essentially the question is around, well, within Microsoft, there's multiple ways that you could enable or remediate a certain item in Secure Score, and Secure Score will present you with maybe 2 or 3 options that all might contribute to your overall percentage. So the question was, how do you decide which is the right option to go for? There's probably no blanket answer for that, but generally I would go for the option that is most cloud ready. So if you can use the Intune endpoint security policies, for example, within Intune specifically, they are the most modern way of applying endpoint security controls. Now, you could configure the same kind of thing through device policies, and you'd have the same kind of outcome. But this is where we've got 2 options to do a very similar thing. So part of the answer comes down to your knowledge of where Microsoft is developing their technologies. So I know that within the endpoint security blade in Intune, Microsoft is at the moment investing in importing all of the Defender and security related settings into that blade. So that's where I would personally focus around devices, for example. But the answer might be different for identities. So there is absolutely some nuance there. Now, what I would say is that if within Secure Score you're seeing multiple recommendations that may remediate the same kind of threat, you will have to interpret the one that is correct for your business. Okay, there isn't really a silver bullet answer to that. So there is some nuance that's required. But it's a very valid point, and a good thing to raise actually is that, Microsoft, on one hand, they present this data to us, which is fantastic, but they don't always make it easy to remediate it in the correct kind of way. So it's a great point to raise, and I can't give an exact answer because it just depends a bit too much on each recommendation. So I'm just looking again. So we've got a question around is achieving a 90% secure score that hard, and why can't we aim for 100%? So you can aim for 100%. What I would say is that because it's a dynamic number, you might, in theory, you could achieve 100%, but it's going to be very, very difficult to get there. And even if you do get there, the number is going to eventually decrease because of some kind of change in the technology. So it's aspirational. I definitely agree with the principle behind the question, but in our experience, even getting to 90% can be really difficult for a lot of organizations. So that's why we say we'll get you to that 90% threshold. Anything above that is a bonus, but maintaining 100%, it's just not really feasible. And secure score is not meant to be kind of completed. You never finish secure score. It's an ongoing piece of work. And so, yeah, we can aspire to 100, but we can't really expect to be there continuously. There's a question around cost. So secure score itself doesn't have a particular cost to it. Basically, if you have a Microsoft 365 license, then you have secure score as part of that license. So there's no individual cost. It's available to you with the right license. So you will all probably have availability into it. So please use it. And just maybe one final question. I know we're over time here. So we've got one around prioritizing. How do you prioritize which recommendations to remediate? Yeah, so quick wins are always good. You can look at the individual percentage that each recommendation includes. That's a good way as well. But again, there's a bit of nuance. You need to understand what are your business objectives. Is there a particular area of security that you're weakest in? Maybe that's an area to focus on. Do you currently have some capacity to do some mini projects? Maybe actually then you focus on some of the more complicated items. So the answer will vary depending on your business, and this is something important to understand is where you as an organization invest your time and resources into cyber, it needs to align with your business goals. So if you've got sensitive customer data, I would advise that protecting your data is a high priority item. If your organization doesn't have any data, and that's not really part of your business model, then you can maybe look at other places. Maybe you have a lot of BYOD devices. You've got lots of users who bring their own mobile phones or laptops. Well, maybe then device security is where you should focus your time. So those are the kind of things that I would be questioning. What is the fundamental part of your business that must be secure? And then we can try and focus on those. And this helps with the conversations with leadership in terms of aligning their expectation with your time and dedication into security, and making sure that you're working as a team and not kind of crossing over. So that's what I would consider in those kind of areas. So with that said, I think we'll wrap up the session. If there is any final questions, then feel free to reach out to one of the CyberOne team, and we'll get back to you. If you would like any further time with myself or one of our other cyber experts, you can engage with us, and we'll have a 30-minute consultation. There's no charge. It's just a chat, a chance for you to ask some questions and just get to know each other a little bit. So please reach out if you would like to. And with that said, again, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate the attendance in the morning. And yeah, hopefully we'll speak to some of you soon. Thank you all.